Hey everyone, welcome to Click 3D. This is the program where we talk about how you can use your digital camera to create 3D models. And my name is Eugene Liscio, and today I want to cover a few things on how to use a program called PhotoModeler to get 3D models and measurements from single images from planar surfaces. Sounds like a lot. It's actually fairly simple or relatively simple, but it can also prove to be quite useful. So let me share my screen here. We're going to get right to it. So today, 3D models from planar surfaces. And what is it that I'm really talking about here? Well, the first thing is, what happens when you take a photograph that is not at 90 degrees to the surface, so it's not perpendicular? And in forensics, things like footwear impressions or all kinds of different photographs, people are taught to take the photos at 90 degrees with a scale, and you basically can extract measurements from them because you are at 90 degrees. There's no perspective distortion. But in a case like this, where I have an image and it's skewed on the wall, well, that poses a problem, right? Because now there's perspective distortion and I need to fix it in order to get scaled measurements for the bloodstains or for any other object. So sometimes it just happens that you're not paying attention, or you don't know that something is important until later. And there may be a whole number of photographs you get later on, and one of them might have something important on there. You want to extract some information. This is a way that you can do it. Now, sometimes the camera can't be placed at 90 degrees to the surface, and that's because the sign or the object or whatever it is just too high up. Okay, you don't have a ladder, you don't have a pole to stick your camera on or whatever, so you're kind of at a loss. You do your best to get as high as you can. In this case, I was sort of lifting the camera up, but of course, then sometimes, it's hard to get perfectly at 90 degrees unless you have a really tall tripod. So that's another instance where you might have a problem. Let's say it was a big sign on the roadway or something like that. That would be a perfect example. Another one is, well, when there's something on the ground. And so in this case, I've got this, markings on the ground or whatever. Now I can't get high enough over the image. Now, I guess you could, take the camera over a small piece of it and then start taking overlapping images and maybe try to piece it together in a mosaic. But in this case, this is really common, for example, when there's tire marks on the ground at a collision scene or something like that. And so what I want to be able to do is take this image, straighten it out, and then take measurements from it. So the difficulty here is the camera can't get directly on top of the object so that the lens is pointing at 90 degrees down to the surface. So that's a little bit of an issue, but this is another instance where this can happen. Now, another thing that can happen is you may have a 3D object, and that object, has got planar surfaces, and they're perpendicular to each other. And well, I can, photograph one surface at a time, but then I'd have to take separate measurements. I can't take them or build a full 3D model. So I can't capture all the images at the same time. Now, normally when we talk about photogrammetry, we would normally take a lot of overlapping images, multiple images. And that's not what I'm talking about here. Something like this filing cabinet or things that are on the ground are really easy to do when you are there and you can take all the images. But sometimes you're on the receiving end. So, somebody hands you photographs and there's something in one of the photographs only that you want to extract some measurements for or build a model or something like that. So that's when it becomes a little bit difficult because you don't have any particular recourse. So there are some requirements that you have to consider when you're reviewing these kinds of photographs, or if you want to take measurements and you want to start looking at these. So let's talk about them here. The first one is that the surface that you're working with has to be planar. What I mean by that is it has to be flat. So you can't have a something like this, and then all of a sudden there's a corner that's bent or it's wavy like this. Okay, it has to be generally flat. And it doesn't have to be perfectly flat. There's very few things that are actually perfectly flat, but so long as it can be assumed to be flat, that would be okay. Now, if it's a rectangular or square object, then it's assumed that the corners are at 90 degrees to each other. So the different sides or different lengths, they should be known and they should be equal to one another. And that would be useful, in the case of if it's a window, if it's a door or something like that, you pretty much know that the top and the bottom of the door or the two sides are equal in length. So that's helpful. The other thing is that if you're going to be taking measurements, the object that you're taking measurements of needs to be on the surface of the plane. So if you have a flat plane and there's an object that's sitting on the ground or whatever, you can measure where it touches the ground. So wherever you see that object, on the ground, that would be okay. So if somebody's standing on a plane, a sidewalk or something like that, you can measure where their feet are located. But without doing some other more complex things, it's difficult to measure their height going upwards. Okay, now there are techniques to do that, but in the method I'm talking about today, where you're just gonna what's called rectify a single plane or a single image in one plane, then you're really just measuring on the ground. And this is good for historical images too. So the nice thing is it doesn't have to be a digital image. It could be any image at all. Could be a section or a cropped image. Could be something that came from film or textbook, whatever. But so long as it's rectangular or square, then you can work with it. Also, if you want to be able to take measurements, you're going to need some kind of a reference measurement. Okay, something should be known about it, so that you can say at least from one edge or one length or something is at a specific length in centimeters, inches, feet, whatever. It doesn't really matter. And if you can get additional measurements, so you have other things that are available to you as a check, that's a great to do. So you can scale one length, and then when you get in, you can measure a couple other things and just make sure that your measurements are pretty close. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to bring up PhotoModeler, and we're going to use that program today. So I have it here. Now, I will say this before I jump in, is that this has come up for me a couple of times in some cases. And I've done this once where there were some tire marks on the ground, and the area where the tire marks were was pretty flat and level, and so it was possible to take some measurements based on some of the items that were on the ground, and by using the method that I'm going to be doing today. This also came up in another case that I had where I was requested to locate and do some work with bloodstains on a wall. And the interesting thing there was this was a very old case. This was a 30 or 40-year-old case. It was a cold case. It was never solved. But I was able, through having some very good measurements and some old images, to use this method to locate the blood stains and do some other work there to reconstruct a 3D model. So there's some utility in what I'm going to be showing you, and I'm hoping that you're going to find it useful. So I'm going to do this in a series of steps and kind of demonstrate a couple of things. The first thing we'll do is just a very simple example of just a plane, and then we'll scale it, and then we can take some measurements. And the second one, I'm going to show you what happens if you try to measure something off the surface, or if there's an item off the surface when you project a texture. What happens? Okay, you get some problems there. And lastly, what we'll do is we'll do a 3D object, something simple like that filing cabinet. Okay, so let's get started here. So this is PhotoModeler, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project, and this is going to be a manual project. All right, and I'm going to click to add an image, and I'm going to go back and let's do the right here, the disabled or handicapped spot. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to fly through this a little bit because I just don't want to waste too much of your time. But basically what we're doing is something called a constraints project. And that's because in a normal photogrammetry project, we're going to have multiple images and everything else. And so what I have here is just a single image. I've got this square marking on the ground, and this is what I want to produce as a plane, as a planar object that could be exported in another 3D package. So what am I going to do here? Well, first thing I need to do is draw lines. Okay, so There's a shortcut, but there's lines here. And I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm just going to click 4 points for the corners. And I'm going to create 4 lines like that. And then I'm going to hit it there. And then I'm going to end it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and actually look closely in detail. I'm going to put these in place. So I'll put that in the corner there. I'm going to do this one down here. Like that. Maybe that's a little bit better. Okay, I probably will breeze through this pretty quickly just to save some time. Something like that. And then we'll do the last one, and I think we'll be okay. All right, great. So let's say this is okay. And of course, you can do this with a little bit more care. And you can see that there's a little bit of color that's bleeding out. Okay, so this is probably not perfectly square. The other problem here is that your camera could have distortion. And I guess I should talk a little bit about distortion. So I'll probably do a whole segment on lens distortions, but a lot of you are very familiar with barrel distortion, and that's where we have an image, it looks bowed on the edges of the image. And you see this a lot in wide angle lenses, or for example, in security cameras, you get that really heavy bending on the edges. And of course, if you have that, and then you try to straighten that image or use it the way we're doing it here, part of the image is just going to be outside, and you'd have to correct the distortion first and then apply this particular method. And there's ways to do that in Photoshop and in other software, and maybe one day I'll look at that and I can talk about it maybe when I do the next segment on distortion. But yeah, just keep that in mind. The lenses here are not too bad. And again, I don't know if these parking lines are painted perfect either. So the next step here after you mark these lines is we need to do something called constraints. Okay, we're going to add constraints, and that's really just telling it that these lines are parallel to one another and these other 2 lines are parallel to one another, and it will help to rebuild this as a planar object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the constraints dialog by hitting C and this little icon, and I'm going to go add. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an x-axis constraint, so the lines which are the x-axis, and I'm going to do one for the y-axis like that. And so now I have 2, and I'm going to go, okay, I don't have any z-axis constraints, just these 2. So I will click this top one. I'm going to click the bottom one, basically select both of them, and I'm going to assign them to the x-axis, and I'm going to say add. And I'm going to do the same thing with these other 2 on the other side. I'm going to assign those to the y-axis, and I'm going to go add. So now I've added all the lines here to this particular object. So what I want to do is I have to process this, okay, in order for PhotoModeler to figure out that that's a plane. So it's done something here. It says, yeah, was able to do something with this. And so let's have a look at it in 3D. So I'm going to bring that up. So you can see I've got a square basically here, and so it's figured out that it's a square. That's great, but we want to go a bit further than this because we want to know that we want to build a surface. So I'm going to hit the shortcut key for that, which is 5, okay, or where it says here path. Okay, you can create a path. So I'm going to go 1, 2, just clicking the edges like that. Okay, click them all, and then I'm going to go finish surface. So now you'll see in the 3D view that I've got a surface, a flat surface, a flat plane, which is good. That's what we want. But there's still a few things that remains to be done. So one is that I don't have any scale in this particular project. And the other thing is that I want to project the image onto that particular surface. So we can do that. And that's what we're going to be doing next. So in order to get the image on here, it's pretty simple to do. I'm going to go to this visibility tab, and as I go down to the bottom here, you'll see there's one that says quality textures. And all I have to do is click on that. And what it will do is go back to the original image. It's going to pull all the pixels and it's going to apply them as best as it can based on, okay, this right here. All right. So now you can see that I've got a model of this up on the screen, which is great, but it's not scaled. So now that's my next step. I need to be able to scale this. Well, there's a way to do that. I'll just bring it up here quickly. I'm just going to type in search in the search window scale. So there's a scale rotate wizard. and this makes it pretty easy to do. So the first thing is I'm going to say I want everything in, well, I'll do this one in meters, and I'm going to go next. And then it says, what's the reference distance? Well, it's 1.5 meters square. So I'm going to go next. And then it says, okay, well, what am I going to use to scale this? Well, I need to pick an object. Any of the sides would have worked. That's fine. And now it says, okay, you've got a scale. Do you also want to orient this? Okay, so do you want to tell it which way is the x-axis, whatever? For this particular project, I'm just going to say, hey, you know what? Define a scale and let's be done with it. So that is pretty much it. And if I want to look just to check, if I click on one of the sides here, okay, up here, okay, it says it's 1.5 meters. So it is in fact scaled. So you can also go in here and you can draw on the surface. You can take some other measurements if you want to. But if I just wanted to export this, then all I have to do is go File, Export, and then you can export the model. I'm not going to do it here, but just know that it is in fact available. And I'm going to save this project before I exit, and I'm just going to call this the disabled parking spot, and I'll do it like that. Okay, great. So in this particular project, really what I know I went pretty quickly through it, but I'm basically taking a single image, a planar surface, or something that I can assume is planar, and then I am basically creating a 3D model of it. So you project a texture onto that surface. Not too bad, pretty simple to do. For the next project, what I want to show you is that we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to have an image where there's something above the surface. And I'm going to show you what happens if you try to take a measurement of that. So I'm going to bring in just a very quick photo that I did here, and we're going to use constraints again. Exact same thing. I have to do the exact same thing here. So this is an image of just a cartridge case. It's on a table. I put two scales together to make a square. And what I'm going to do now is basically do the exact same thing, but I want to show you what happens to an image or an object that is off the surface and how it basically skews the projected image that's on there. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to create some lines, and I'm going to do this very quickly. Just roughly get them into position, and these all have to be connected. So when I click on the last one here, I make sure it's connected. I'm going to end, and then what I'm going to do is just refine this. So, and I'm doing this quickly, but basically the intersection of these two is somewhere down here, and I just place these scales relatively quickly, so they're not perfect, but somewhere down here would be the corner. The corner is down here. Something like that would be the bottom corner, like right there. And then I'm going to look up here, and the bottom corner would be somewhere like down here. It has to be in line with this. And I think that's good enough. We'll live with that. Okay, lines are drawn. So now we have to do the constraints. So I'm going to hit the letter C as a shortcut, open up the dialog box. And just like we did before, I'm going to add the X and Y constraints here. Okay, great. I'm going to do that, and now we have to assign them. And it doesn't matter what you call your X or Y. I'm just going to do this quickly. So these two I'm going to call my X. These two I'm going to call my Y, and I'm going to add those, and now I can try to solve for that. So I'm just going to hit process. Okay, and I'm going to go okay. And I'm not going to get into the details of the processing, but from here, I basically should have a rectangle, but I'm going to jump ahead. Just not to waste time, and I'm going to make the path like I did before. So I'm going to click on these four sides like this. I'm going to finish the surface. Now when I go into the 3D view, you'll see that I have my surface ready to go. Let's apply the texture, and this is where you'll see what happens with the cartridge case, which is off the top. So this will always happen, and sometimes people think that it looks really, really strange, but you'll see when you look at this flat that it skews, okay? It skews the projection of the cartridge case. So it's not like you can look around it, right? This happens to be in the image, and as a result, when it pastes it onto the plane, it becomes highly distorted. Okay, so that's unfortunate. And what I was saying before is that I can only take measurements of the cartridge case where it intersects with the plane. So basically on the bottom part over here, I can't take measurements for it up here because all this part over here is distorted on the plane. So I'm kind of at a loss here. I have a little bit of a problem. So now there are ways to do things here to take measurements upwards, okay? But it would be, there's some other things that we have to discuss. Now, you can do some things, for example, if you want to outline the path that's here, I can draw on this surface in PhotoModeler. So I'm just going to take a few points here. I'm going to do this really quickly. I could probably do a curve, but these are just straight lines. And you'll see that as I'm drawing this, if I zoom in on the 3D view, you'll see some things coming up here. Okay, that's good enough. But if I zoom in here, you'll see that I actually have a series of lines, like over here, okay? Just like that. So I've got a bunch of lines here that I can measure. So this is really useful because if I want to measure between different objects, then I can. The only thing I can't do is I can't measure what's not on the surface and what's above or below the surface. Okay, great. So let me save this project. That's looking pretty good. And I think I'm just going to call this cartridge case demo. Oops. Let me try this again. Cartridge case 2. How about that? All right, there we go. It's happy now. All right, so next what I want to do for our project is I want to create a 3D model of a filing cabinet, let's say, or something that has X, Y, and Z. So it might be a box-like shape or a rectangular prism, maybe a square type of mailbox or something like that. You can definitely do, just simple models. The back of a truck, the cab or something like that. If it's square, the trailer, you can do those in 3D for sure. So let's do this again, and we're gonna start over. We're gonna make a new project. It's gonna be a manually marked project, and we're gonna bring in the filing cabinet. And I'm gonna use this image here. Go next. All right, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to do the constraints project. We're going to use constraints, 3 or more parallel lines. And if I open this up, you see I've got the image here. So it's on the side. I don't want to work like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the properties and I'm going to rotate this. So I can just go, hey, rotate this 90 degrees, apply. All right, now we got something to work with. So this is Larry, the dummy here from the office. Don't mind him. He's quite happy there. And we're going to start marking lines on the cabinet. So I'm going to go to lines. And again, I'm just going to do this roughly. I'm going to pick the corners here like that. Down just really quickly. I should take more care, but that's okay for now. And I also have to connect this with the corner here and there. And I also have to connect this corner with the bottom corner there. Okay, cool. So that's just very rough. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and adjust all of this so that it's closer. It may not be perfect, but it'll be close. Okay, there's one. I got to do this one is way off, so I'm going to put it down here like that. And I'm going to put this one here like this. This one here needs to be adjusted like there. Okay, these other two. And like one there. It's a little hard to see, but we'll get that and get that corner up here. So this one actually has to come down about here. That was a piece of like dust or something that was right there. So I know that's the corner. And then here, well, it's something like, okay, it's not perfect, but let's say it's somewhere like this. Yeah, I like that. And let me just check that back corner again. Make sure that it's doing okay. Yeah, it's not too bad. Okay, so could be a little bit closer, could be a little bit better, but we're going to live with that for now and see what it does. So when we got our lines all done, what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the constraints again. So I'm going to hit the letter C, open the dialog box. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the X, Y, and Z because I've got those in there too. I've got another dimension that I can use, and that should help it with the solution. There, I got the 3, and I'm going to hit OK. So just like I did before, 1, 2, and 3. Now these ones are going to be for the Z or Z axis, so I'm going to add those, and I will make 1, 2, and 3 for the X axis. And then I will add those, and then I'll take 1, 2, and 3 and make these for the y-axis. Okay, just like before, I'm going to try and tell PhotoModeler to try and solve for this. And let's see here. Is it not cooperating? Hold on a second. Sometimes you got to... Okay, there we go. I think this is going to work now. There we go. Process. All right, so it did something for us. And let's just see what it looks like in 3D just to make sure. But yeah, it looks like we've got... Okay, we've got this filing cabinet, and we got all the edges laid out as per the lines that we drew, which is good. Okay, great. So now what we need to do is we need to draw all the surfaces. So the surfaces is pretty much the same as before. So I'm going to go, it's a path. So I'm going to draw the top, and you'll see this coming up in 3D as I draw it. I'm going to do another one over here, just like that. I'm going to finish that surface, and I will create another one here, just like that, and I finish that surface. So now we've got our surfaces, and just like before, we need to add the quality textures. So if you just do the regular textures, it's just a really fast, quick and dirty, just to kind of give you an idea. So this is okay. You'll notice that I've got the side and I've got the front, and it's not perfect. So I need to make some adjustments. You'll see here that it's not perfect here on the side, but I'm just going to live with that for now. But you notice I don't have anything on the top. Now there is a little setting in PhotoModeler, and what happens is when you have the material, and up here is the material section. So if I click on this and I go to the surface default, what happened was when the angle gets too oblique, I'll just make this much bigger. So 80 degrees, it won't project that particular surface or that texture on the surface. So I'm going to update the textures now that I've told it, hey, make sure you use even highly oblique angles, and it should paste something here. And actually, if you look, we do have something here, right? So that looks okay. So we have a 3D model here. And this particular model, just like the others, isn't scaled at all. So we would need to do all that. And just for the heck of it, you know what? I may as well just run through it. I've gone this far. So if I want to scale, all I can do is I'll just use the scale rotate wizard. That's a quick and dirty way to do it. There are other ways to do it in PhotoModeler, and we're going to do this in centimeters. And I know that the depth here is actually 60 centimeters. So I'm going to go 60, and then it says, hey, give me a side to use. So, oops, I'm just going to use this side. Actually, let me pick it from here. It's easier. I'll go next. And I can choose to define the rotation. So if I go, yeah, I want to do that too, it says, well, what's my X? What's left to right or whatever? And I can say, well, make this, or here, make this line down here, my X. And I'll go, okay. All right. And, oh, I got to do it again. Sorry about that. And then I'll do my vertical, which is my Z. So I can pick points too. I can go point down there and a point up here, and go finished. And then I'll reset this. So now I'm looking at it from the top down, and you'll see as I rotate, okay, my x-axis is kind of in the other direction. So I could have called that the y-axis. But you'll see that when I started off, this, I was looking top down here. And I can also just put some little axes displays on here just to make it a little bit simpler. So you'll see that, okay, I've got the Z, that's the X, or that's the and the Y this way, but you'll see it's kind of oriented differently. But I have a 3D model now, and it's textured, it's scaled. I can use it to take other measurements on there. And this can be a really, really useful technique. Again, now I can export this as an OBJ file, as an STL. There's different ways that I can export this from the model. But, if you're ever in a situation where you find that, you have a single image, you have something in there that's like flat or it's on the ground, and you want to be able to take a measurements, or you want to turn it into a model because you want to bring it into another program like 3D Studio Max or Cloud Compare, this is definitely one way that you can use. And PhotoModeler is a program that's a fully comprehensive photogrammetry package. So it allows you to do things with single images that you wouldn't be able to do in other programs. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions or comments, just add them down below. But that does it for this episode of Click 3D. Thank you very much.